Hello, everyone. My name is Tony Hightower. I am here with Connected Empowerment. And with me today is our very special first guest, Charles Tubbs. He is a coworker of mine and a very, very awesome man. And so I just wanted to have him on to help tell his story and help shape our way ahead into what we need to do to be more responsive to needs right now. So Charles, tell me about yourself. How are you? What are you into? What do you do?
Good. Thank you, Tony, and thanks for having me. As I said, I'm Charles Tubbs, and I'm a patient experience coach for the VA, and I have the awesome pleasure of working with Tony. And just, been in the VA now for almost 10 years, Air Force veteran, retired, did that for 21 years. So just happy to be here.
Good deal. So, what was it like growing up for you? How was that? Like, tell us about your childhood.
I grew up a country boy in Alabama, actually, and it was, pretty humble beginnings, I would say, working, doing some farming, and just, enjoying my childhood. It was, the South. I was born in 1971, so there was definitely some tension that was always just evident in the environment there. But had great parents and large families, 7 boys, 2 girls in my family. So I'm the youngest of 9 children.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so that was an interesting upbringing. We were and are very close. So that was a very good support structure, I'd say, for my household perspective.
Good deal. What's your hobbies, Charles? What do you do when you're not working? I know you work a lot of long hours and you work hard. What do you do when you're not doing that?
So yeah, when I'm not working and focused on VA and veterans, I'm a part of a motorcycle club called Buffalo Soldiers, and we ride. My chapter rides all over the country, literally. I've not been as adventurous as many of them have, but we are out and about educating the public about the history of the Buffalo Soldiers. And I used to love photography. I've not found as much time for it as I used to, but that was a very big passion of mine as well.
Nice. Can you tell us, I know some people that are listening to this as we get to know you, they may not know about the Buffalo Soldiers. Can you tell us a little bit about that history? And I know you shared it at work and it was amazing. I do know a little bit about it, but obviously not to that extent. So can you kind of share what the significance was and what they went through?
Sure. Well, the impetus of the Buffalo Soldiers really came about at the abolishment of slavery, and folks needed to find work at that point, and the military became an option. And in fact, black soldiers or black folks were recruited to go into the military to fight in the war in 1866, in fact. And many of them did volunteer and go and thought that would be a good way of life. And ironically, as I share with folks, is they were fighting for freedom that they didn't even get to enjoy at home, but they served and they did things. For example, during the westward expansion, they escorted the Native American. Oh, I'm sorry, they escorted the white soldiers who were fighting Native Americans as they were battling for that territory going out west. And the Native Americans coined that phrase title, calling them Buffalo Soldiers, because one, they fought like caged buffalo. They called them
Oh,
very
wow.
fierce fighters. And so that name stuck with them, and that's who they became known to be.
Wow, that's an amazing story, and I think one that doesn't get shared a lot. So thanks for sharing that. I think it's so important,
Sure.
especially in today's world. So let me ask you, I didn't, being a Caucasian person, I didn't know that there was a standard talk for children that are African American in dealing with police, putting hoodies up, etc. And my friend had shared with me that she had to have the talk with her son. It wasn't the talk I thought we were talking about. Like for us, it's the talk of don't have sex, don't drink underage, those kind of things. But when she shared what that meant to to you guys, I was really like, I just cried for so long because I couldn't imagine this young kid, this wonderful kid that I could never see getting in trouble, being told that after swim practice when it's cold, he can't put his hoodie up because he may look suspect because he's black and he's tall. And so I was wondering if you could share if you had that talk with your kids, or if that talk was given to you, or what do you know about that talk?
Absolutely. I will tell you that that talk is definitely not about the birds and the bees. It is a conversation, excuse me, rooted in survival, um, faced with the reality of where we are as a society, and that how sad of a day when a person cannot just be themselves and walk down the street without having that fear. And so the talk with my sons, as many African American dads have had, or parents have had to have with their, especially their sons, is that, son, you may have been taught well, you're a very well mannered child, and very respectful, not just of authority but other adults and just other human beings, but you have an added burden that you have got to be mindful when you are in public, that even when things go wrong, if you had nothing excuse me, nothing to do with it, you have an extra burden to bear to ensure that you are not associated with things that are going wrong. But also, even when things aren't going wrong, just being mindful of your hands in your pocket, being mindful that if you do encounter, for example, the police, that you absolutely have to go above and beyond to be respectful. Be mindful of where your hands are. Do not make any sudden moves. When my specific instructions to my sons have been, if a police pulls them over, go to a lighted area, ensure all the interior lights are on the car, on in the car, ensure that all the windows are rolled down completely so that there are no surprises. I'm at the place now where I want to install the I forget what it's called, but the cameras that record internal to the car what's going on, so that they have that extra protection for themselves or evidence if needed.
Oh wow. Charles, I'm just so sorry. I can't even imagine the extra burden that puts on you as a father or on your children, and them having to tell one day their children and have that talk.
Yeah.
I just, I mean, I have three nephews who are mixed race, and I can't imagine like that they had that talk. Although I know they did, I really feel like, wow, where have I been, and how come I didn't know this? And that is to me the definition of white privilege, is that we don't have to think about those things. We don't have to think about those talks. They're just, I'm just going to have an encounter with police and it's just going to be okay. But that additional burden that's placed on you right now, especially because of the color of your skin, I'm sorry. I just, I, I didn't know. And I think a lot of us, for those watching, didn't know, but we do know now. And if anything comes out of what's going on today, I think that we can have these conversations and now move equality the right way. So I mean, I hear these stories and it just breaks my heart. And I don't know how to apologize enough except to do these kind of things and get the story out there, because you're such an amazing man and you're such an inspiration. And so thank you for having these very candid and I know hard conversations with us. So what do we need to do, or what can I do? What can we all do? Everybody listening to this, that would help the movement, that would help Black Lives Matter, that would help move this, the toward racial equality. Because I know a lot of people I have heard go, well, of course all lives matter. Well, yes, but your house isn't the house on fire right now. So if we look at a bunch of houses, all houses being equal, yes, but the house is on fire right now, is the house of the African American community that is literally burning down. So how do we help stop that, and for once and for all move it back so that we demand equality? Because, and I know you and I have talked about this, it seems like the minority never gets their rights until the majority speaks up for them. And so that's this time, and I want to make sure that your voice is heard. So how do we then make sure your voice is heard? How do we, um, uh, white Americans, help make that happen?
Well, first off, Tony, thank you so much for asking the question and for hosting a platform like this. I think that's so important. One of my initial thoughts as things really came to a head in most recent events is, you know, it's okay to be angry. I believe that, Black America has a right to feel the way they feel now. You've heard a lot of conversation about some of the rioting and looting and there are both sides of that position, and I say that I understand, because sometimes a caged, whether it's an animal or whatever the case is, if they feel they have no other options, they may lash out and they may strike out, and sometimes bite the hand that feeds them. Different things. So they may burn down other African American businesses. Those, but that person out of frustration may do those things, understanding that there may be some other extremists involved that may be kind of gaslighting the situation. I get that. But out of the anger for myself personally, out of all of the things that have happened, in my lifetime, and understanding the historical context of a lot of events as well, I'm left with, yes, I realize that I'm limited as an African American, and we are limited in what we can do uh, to change some of the laws and things of that nature. But and some of my white sisters and brothers that I'm so thankful for, such as yourself, who have even apologized, acknowledged the privilege that some live in, and even the ignorance, unfortunately, that some live in. And so I'm left with the question, okay, well, white America, what my white brothers and sisters, what is it that I want you to do? And to the point that you make as well, it's about, speaking up, being the voice for the voiceless, being the person that says, you may not listen to this person, but you're going to listen to me, because I'm not worried about getting shot or tased or misrepresented or jailed, inappropriately, because I have that voice, and I'm going to utilize the privilege I have to speak for those who don't enjoy that same benefit that I have. So one, I would say absolutely be the voice for the voiceless. Speak up and demand not just the elected officials, this is not just a police issue. This is an American issue. How do we, even on our day-to-day job and our interactions, how many times have we heard the black jokes? How many times have we heard the epithets that have been shared that have been laughed off? Or how many, even in our own families at times, have we heard folks who say, oh, that's just Uncle Joe. He's always been that way. And so we find ourselves accepting those things, not realizing that those things get passed on to generations. The child that's in the room hears that, may not process it, but somehow it's imparted in them, and they are become associated with those types of acts. And so I just think it's so important that we understand that responsibility that we have to stop those actions from happening. And so
Absolutely.
even as we talk about voting, and that's
Yeah.
for again, my black and white brothers and sisters, when we talk about voting, we have to ensure that we are voting for change for
Yeah.
all people, not just for our selfish agendas.
That's a great point. And I can, I know I don't know if we're friends on Facebook or not, but I do, follow a lot of people on Facebook with a lot of different, and we were discussing this the other day, very different opinions on what right looks like right now. And, my line was drawn where I said, if you're racist, feel free to just go ahead and unfriend me right now, because I'm
Mhm.
not going to take it, and you're right. I think we're all guilty of, well, that's just that person. I've had offline debates with people that I served in the military with for many, many years who, are asking the questions. And so I think that change can be made. But the blatant, disrespectful, ugly comments, I'm not letting them go anymore. And so, family or not, if I have to unfriend you, then I say farewell to you and I wish you well and Godspeed. But the line has been drawn, and I will not accept it anymore. And I think when you had prompted me with that some time ago, it really made me think that if you don't do something to stand against it, then you stand with it. Even if you don't think that's what you're doing, you are, by being passive about it. And so I'm not going to be passive anymore. And I think the call to action, and what I love is all the people that are out protesting. I'm seeing, Caucasians out there as well, locking arms and saying enough is enough. And this is the first time in a long time, if maybe ever, that has been the case. And that's the only way that we're going to demand that change. So I think it is coming. But you said something very interesting about not just it being police matter. And I think this issue with Floyd has definitely brought everybody to the forefront of police need to redo how they do business, maybe retraining, whatever. And of course, there's only just very, very few bad police that are making it bad for everybody, but everybody could be retrained to do better, because we can always, and I'm a retired police officer, so I can say this, we can always do better as police for sure.
Right.
And I think what's not being talked about is then where are the other parts of life that we need to address. And I think you said it just needs to be everywhere. So work, home, not just putting this all on, this is just interactions with police. This is day-to-day interactions. And so
Sure.
where else can we make those changes?
Well, and Tony, thank you again for asking very prudent questions and timely. What I would say is, we've got to look institutionally as well, because when we talk about where Black America is today as compared to white America, there is a huge distinction when we talk about the distribution of wealth. How often have we heard, and some folks have actually talked about pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps? That's very cliche, sounds very easy to roll off the tongue. But if you were to picture a race, and we would, the finish line is ahead of us, and for, 400 years, you have been held back at the starting line. And whereas this population has been allowed to prosper, has been allowed to get loans, bank loans, has been gifted land that was stolen historically from the Native Americans, but that has been translated into generational wealth that folks nowadays are benefiting from. And then we say, well, now let's start the race, and everybody start from where they are. You've been held back for hundreds of years. You've been allowed to walk in privilege for this number of years. Now let's start the race. That's probably not going to have a positive outcome for that person that's been held back. So when we look again at institutions, and police are just a product of that institutionalized racism, when we look at those institutions, we learn very easily that why is it that in the African American communities, why is it that education scores are so low? But look at the funding for those. When we look at housing, why is it that African Americans don't get approved for housing loans on the same level as our white brothers and sisters? Look at interest rates even for loans. It's statistically proven that African American, by far, interest rates are higher, not because of worse credit, but just they are determined to be at a higher risk. Looking at wealth. Why is it that regardless of, statistically proven also, regardless of education, the wealth gap between Black and white America does not change based on education? That the size of that gap between those two populations cannot change unless we look historically at some of the institutional things that are in place and correct those as well. And we've got to be willing to have those conversations also.
That's a great point. It seems like there's almost two standards, which is not okay. And I, wouldn't have thought about any of that, again, unless we are having these hard conversations. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. Let me ask you this, Charles, and you're a buff dude, and you're in shape and everything else. And so I can't imagine that there's anything that you fear, but if, is your fears different than mine? And so I was curious. Obviously you don't want to tangle with me. I get that. No, I'm playing, but is there, what is it that you fear most today?
I don't necessarily fear for myself, but again, as a father, I do think about my sons who, my oldest son is 22, and I think about, as a father, you protect your children. That's what you care most about. And, biblically speaking, you're taught to train your children in the way in which they should grow. And then when they grow older, they won't depart from those teachings. But the fear is that regardless of how good of a parent you are, and the principles that you teach your children, and in my case, my sons, that day could come where they have an encounter, where they come in contact with not only just that officer, or they come in contact with that system or that bank that denies them their right as a human being. But in the case of a police officer that says, because of the manner in which they look, that they have already been tried and convicted in that officer's mind, and anything that they would do would be justified for a reaction that may turn out to be lethal. And my teaching, my protection, my love for them would have no bearing on that outcome. And that's a fear of mine. And the other fear I have is based on some of the climate we have established in society today is that, you know, our, as human beings, we have become even more numb to the inequities of society. Uh, so much so that I fear we've lost ourselves.
Wow, that's very insightful. Thank you. I fear, I guess my fear has been the debates over the kneeling for the flag, and my thoughts are always going to be, that piece of cloth, which I love the flag, I serve my country and I love it more than anything, but that piece of cloth should never be more important than the people it represents. And right now it feels like that is the case. So brother, I will kneel with you until this is done, and hopefully we can all stand united. And I thank you for having the hard conversations and putting yourself out there and sharing. And know this is not an easy conversation to have. And, I'm hoping that lots of people will see this video and go, you know what, things need to change. So one life, one day at a time. Yes, sir.
What's on? Let me say to you, thank you for having the courage to host this. I mean, as a non-African American person, you may get scrutinized for having a venue like this, and I know you well enough to know that you don't care about that, that you can stand that test. But it does take folks who look like you to have the courage to have these hard conversations. One, to ask the difficult questions, but to be willing to listen to the difficult responses that come from that. But even thirdly, to be willing to take steps, those baby steps that gets us going in the right direction, because we've got to have a grassroots change that will bring about the improvements that we need, not just in racial relations, but equity for all Americans.
That's right. Thank you, Charles. I know this session, this one is about to wrap up. So for those of you that have just listened to Charles, take these words in, listen to this several times, what he's talked about. It used to be segregation in the military with the Buffalo Soldiers, etc. It doesn't feel like we've come very far. It doesn't feel like we're not still segregated. It doesn't feel like we're not still equal. And I know that, and I feel it, and I can't feel it like they feel it, but I'm telling you, it's time for change. So let's take the time to connect with each other, to understand, and to have each other's back, and to rise united, because America right now is burning down, but like a phoenix from the ashes, she can rise better than she ever was. So connected empowerment, connect. Just connect. Let's be one America again. Thank you, Charles, for putting it out there. Thank you for setting us straight. I'm going to have you back again. Because I think that there's a model that we can use to have these hard conversations, to teach others how to have these conversations that come natural because we're friends. So thank you, sir, for everything you do. Thank you for your service to the country. Thank you for your service. You said you work for the VA, so thank you for what you do for them. I appreciate you very much, and I will wish you well. So thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Take care.